Let's look a little bit more at debt and equity as possible sources of business financing. When you borrow money from somebody, when you're starting a small business, you're generally taking quite a bit of risk, because whether the business succeeds or not, you're going to have to pay that money back. Fairly self-explanatory. When you get equity, either using your own money, which of course you don't have to pay back if you lose it in your business, or getting shares from somebody else, you don't have to pay that money back if things don't work out. So there's less risk for you. The nice thing about debt is that all you have to do is pay the money back, pay a little bit of interest, and you get to keep all the profits from your business. With equity, that's a little bit different. You likely entered into some arrangement where a certain percentage of the profits are going to go to that person who gave you that equity. And probably because that person is taking more risk, they're going to require a lot more profits than they would get if they were just loaning you the money in terms of an interest arrangement. So those two things have to be balanced off. You can think of this, there's a term they use in business called leverage. The more debt you have, the more leveraged you are. Imagine you buy a house one year for $100,000, you sell it the next year for $110,000, you have a $90,000 mortgage, you had $10,000 down. Ignoring all the other complicated factors like mortgage payments and rents and things. Simplistically speaking, you see in this case, if I sell that house a year later, I have $20,000 after I pay off the bank. I only put $10,000 in. My profits in 1 year were 100%. That's leverage because I borrowed money. If I found a private investor to go in as a partner with me on that house purchase, they would have taken 90% of all the money we got from selling the house, and I only would have got to keep 10%. So remember, I put in $10,000, the private investor put in $90,000. If we sold the house for $110,000, there's a 10% profit, we'd share the profits equally. I'd end up with $11,000 in my pocket, and they'd end up with $99,000 in their pocket. So you see, not as much leverage, not as much return. So risk and reward, we've talked about that in terms of debt and equity, how that impacts your business. But probably the most important impact is cash flow. The trouble with debt is that businesses that get started with too much debt and not enough equity historically fail. And then they have nothing to do with the management ability of the people that started the business, nothing to do with whether they have a product or service that there's a market for. It's simply that they're committing so much financial energy to their business to make their debt payments that they can't do things like an aggressive marketing campaign that should be happening at month 6, or going to a trade show at month 12 and negotiating really good deals with their wholesaler to get better prices for their raw materials. Equity, on the other hand, remember we have an investor here who's not expecting anything but profits. So there doesn't have to be cash flow running out of the business, going away from the expenses to pay off that investor. They're probably going to expecting to wait for a few years before they start seeing some of the profits. In fact, they probably want you to plow your profits back into your business. So equity is a much more attractive option when it comes to cash flow, and therefore is required for businesses to succeed in the startup phase. The final issue that I think about in terms of debt and equity is the relationship you have with the investor. The nice thing about debt relationships is they're simple. Someone gave you money, you made a promise to pay them back a certain amount of payments per month. As long as you do that, they're probably not going to be involved in your business. Equity investments can be a little more complicated. If I'm an equity investor and you're starting up a small restaurant and I'm willing to put $50,000 into the startup of your restaurant, and my return is based on you being profitable in 3 years, until then not much is happening, I'm probably going to want to be on top of you. I'm probably going to want to come in for lunch every Thursday and have a little discussion of your numbers and make sure your food costs are under control and talk about whether your advertising campaigns are working properly. I'm going to be a lot more involved. That can be a really good thing. Lots of people who are starting small businesses tend to get equity investments from people that are experts in what they're doing as a startup. That kind of mentoring can be absolutely invaluable. It, however, can also be, the close words of mentoring, I guess, would be meddling. So you want to be really clear when you have a relationship with an equity investor about what the terms of the contract are going to be, how much information are you going to provide them about what you're doing, when do you want their help and when do you not want their help, when is it your business, not theirs. These are things that are really important to clarify when going into an equity relationship with an investor.